March 5th, 1943, Norfolk Naval Base, Virginia. The first American hunter-killer group was almost ready to head out into the Atlantic. Captain Giles Short, the man in charge of USS Bogue, studied a freshly decoded message from the 10th Fleet. Ultra-intelligence had cracked the German naval codes, and now they knew exactly where the U-boat submarines planned to refuel. Milk Cow subs U-459 and U-487 were about to meet up with the wolfpacks hunting the convoy routes. The operations officer picked up the secure phone. One escort carrier and 4 destroyer escorts would go hunting. USS Bogue, USS Belknap, USS George E. Badger, USS Osmond Ingram, and USS Clemson. None of those men had any idea this one mission would flip the entire history of submarine warfare on its head. In just 8 months, American hunter-killer groups would smash the myth that U-boats were unbeatable. Admiral Karl Dönitz would have no choice but to pull his entire submarine fleet out of the Atlantic. The Battle of the Atlantic had already taught both sides a harsh lesson. Submarine warfare was a numbers game. You had to sink more tonnage than your enemy could build, or you'd lose. If you lost subs faster than you could replace them, you were finished. The German Kriegsmarine's U-boat arm had ruled the Atlantic shipping lanes. Just in March 1943, Wolfpack sank more than 80 ships, nearly 500,000 tons lost. The next month, it got worse. Over 600,000 tons went down, the high water mark of the U-boat offensive. The numbers looked good for Germany. They launched 20 new U-boats every month and usually lost fewer than 10. From his headquarters in France, Admiral Dönitz commanded over 400 submarines. His wolfpack tactics nearly cut the lifeline between America and Britain. Convoys SC-121 and HX-229 got hammered. Winston Churchill later wrote that the U-boat threat was the only thing during the entire war that truly scared him. USS Bogue displaced 9,800 tons and carried 890 men. Her flight deck stretched 495 feet, launching 12 F-4F Wildcats and 9 TBF Avenger torpedo bombers. But her real strength came from technology. The Germans hadn't figured out yet centimeter wavelength radar, invisible to German detectors, high-frequency direction-finding gear that could pinpoint U-boat radio transmissions, and tucked away in the Avenger's bomb bays, a secret weapon called the Mark 24 mine. But it wasn't a mine at all. It was a top-secret acoustic homing torpedo. Hunter-killer groups changed everything about fighting submarines. Old-school convoy escorts were stuck on defense, forced to choose between chasing subs or guarding the freighters. Today, hunter-killer groups didn't have to make that choice. Their job was simple: find U-boats and destroy them. Lieutenant Commander Howard Avery would later lead Composite Squadron 9 on the Bogue. He'd seen plenty of action on Atlantic convoys, and he knew when U-boats were at their weakest, surfacing to charge batteries, meeting up with supply subs, or sending radio reports back to Dönitz. German doctrine demanded constant radio contact, position updates every day, contact reports when they saw a convoy, weather reports twice daily, damage assessments after attacks. Every radio transmission risked giving away their position. Allied direction-finding stations were listening. Aboard U-569, Captain Lieutenant Hans Johansson read his patrol orders. 7 weeks at sea had pushed his fuel reserves to the limit. Now, radio orders told him to rendezvous with Milk Cow U-459 at 50°40' north, 35°21' west. Johansson had taken command early in 1943, replacing Hans-Peter Hinch. U-569 was a Type 7C submarine, the workhorse of the German fleet. She displaced 169 tons surfaced, 871 submerged, and carried 14 torpedoes with a crew of 44. Her 4 bow tubes and single stern tube had sunk 1 merchant and damaged another, a modest record, but the Atlantic was getting more dangerous every month. Still, the sub's biggest weakness hadn't changed since World War I. Those diesel engines needed air, and the batteries took hours to recharge on the surface. A Type CIC could stay under for 18 hours at low speed, but try to run fast, and the batteries died in less than an hour. The Americans knew all this and used it against them. They mapped out search patterns to cover as much ocean as possible with radar. Aircraft flew patrols timed to catch subs on the surface. Attack plans kept the pressure on until U-boat batteries ran dry, and survival meant surfacing and being caught. At 2:20 in the afternoon, on May 22nd, 1943, Avenger pilot Lieutenant William Chamberlain picked up a submarine on his radar 18 miles out, dead east. He pushed his stick forward and dove in. Down below, U-569 cruised along at 15 knots, engines roaring as the crew tried to recharge their batteries after a long night on the run. Then the lookouts on the bridge spotted Chamberlain's plane still 8 miles off, but closing fast. Alarms went off all over the sub. Johansson, the commander, shouted for an emergency dive. Crash diving a Type 70C sub wasn't exactly easy. The whole drill, getting from alarm to periscope depth, took 35 seconds if you did it right. They opened the vents, killed the diesels, switched to electric motors. The bow tipped downward as seawater flooded the tanks. But Chamberlain's depth charges found them anyway. He dropped 4 Mark 17s set for shallow depth, and the explosions tore into U-569 as she tried to escape. The damage forced the sub back to the surface. Another Avenger, flown by Howard Roberts, was already circling overhead. Roberts dove in, ready to fire, but stopped when he saw white flags waving from the periscope. The crew was giving up. The Canadian destroyer, HMCS St. Laurent, raced over, but before she could reach them, Johansson ordered everyone to abandon ship and scuttle the boat. 25 men survived and were pulled from the Atlantic. 19 went down with the sub. Capturing U-569 survivors gave Allied intelligence a real treasure trove. During questioning, the German sailors just couldn't believe how accurately the Americans found them. One of them even said it felt like the planes could see right through the ocean. What they didn't know was that ultra-intelligence had done more than just reveal their position. Bletchley Park's codebreakers had cracked the entire German naval grid. Patrol zones, wolfpack meeting spots, supply rendezvous. Nothing was secret anymore. Every U-boat at sea was suddenly exposed. A few weeks later, on June 5th, 1943, the USS Bogue's aircraft found U-2117 on the surface, 450 miles west of the Azores. Captain Kurt Reichenbach Klinker had brought his sub through 3 patrols and sunk 3 ships, over 10,000 tons in all. But that morning, just as Bogue's Avengers attacked, U-217 was caught flat-footed, charging batteries nowhere near deep enough to dive. The first depth charges smashed the diving planes. With no way to submerge, Reichenbach Klinker ordered his gunners to fight back as the crew scrambled to fix the damage. For 18 minutes, U-217 fought on the surface. Their deck gun and anti-aircraft guns spat out more than 300 rounds. One Wildcat took a few hits, but there wasn't much hope. These planes were built to hunt subs. Then another Avenger swept in and dropped depth charges right on target. Explosions ripped U-217's hull wide open. She sank with all 50 men, no survivors, just an oil slick marking the spot. Word of these attacks spread fast. U-boat crews started to panic. Radio intercepts showed commanders worrying about wonder weapons that could find them no matter how they tried to hide. Morale dropped. Crews grew terrified of surfacing, even when they desperately needed to recharge. Admiral Dunitz had to act. He ordered U-boats to cross the Bay of Biscay, submerged. Didn't matter if their batteries ran low. If they needed fuel, they could only surface at night. Radio messages had to be kept as short as possible, but all these changes just slowed the losses. They didn't stop them. The Americans kept pushing. By June 1943, 5 hunter-killer groups were working the Atlantic, each one built around an escort carrier and a screen of destroyers. Bogue, Card, Core, Santee, Croatan. The sheer industrial might behind these ships was something Germany couldn't hope to match. USS Card under Captain Arnold Buster Isbell quickly became one of the deadliest hunter-killer groups out there. Between July and October 1943, Card's group racked up 8 confirmed U-boat kills, earning the first presidential unit citation ever given to a hunter-killer group. The tactics they came up with became standard. Aircraft patrolled in wide, sweeping patterns. The second they got a radar contact, they attacked. If a sub managed to crash dive, planes dropped dive markers, and destroyers closed in with depth charges and hedgehog mortars. On August 7th, 1943, Card's planes caught the Milk Cow U-117 refueling U-66 on the surface. The supply submarine got caught with its fuel hoses still hooked up, so a crash dive was out of the question. Lieutenant Charles Stapler didn't waste a second. He dove right in, dropping 4 depth charges that boxed in U-17. When over 400 tons of diesel fuel exploded, it sent a tower of fire shooting up. People saw it from 30 miles away. U-66 managed to get under, but the blast still damaged her. She'd lived through this only to meet her end 9 months later in one of the strangest battles of the war. Captain Lieutenant Klaus Barkston, commanding U-521, watched U-17's destruction from periscope depth. In his war diary, he wrote about the shock sweeping through the U-boat crews. The Americans seemed to be everywhere at once. Their planes just showed up with no warning, and their weapons hit exactly where they aimed. The hunters had become the hunted. October 1943 changed everything. The U-boat arm lost 23 subs that month. Some of the commanders had been out there since 1939. Every loss stung. Their experience was gone for good, and no training school could make up for it. Losing the Milk Cow supply submarines was a disaster. U-488, U-489, and U-490 all went down within weeks of each other. Without refueling, the Type 7C boats couldn't even reach America's coast. Patrols shrank back to the mid-Atlantic, where more and more hunter-killer groups waited. The USS Corps' hunter-killer group took things further, perfecting round-the-clock air coverage. Their planes stayed over suspected U-boat zones for days, wearing down submarine batteries and nerves alike. Even seasoned commanders couldn't hold out against this kind of pressure. On October 13th, 1943, Corps' group caught U-378 on the surface at dawn. The commander, Oberleutnant Zorzi Erika, had just turned 26. You could see his inexperience. He tried to fight it out on the surface instead of diving right away. 4 Wildcats strafed the sub, and 2 Avengers swooped in for depth charge runs. The sub's gunners hit 1 Wildcat, but they didn't last long. Machine gun fire swept them off the conning tower. Erika gave the order to abandon ship after depth charges tore open the hull. Only 1 man survived. These battles shocked even the old hands. Korvettenkapitän Hinrich Bleriot, one of Germany's top aces, 24 ships sunk, barely made it out alive after an attack by USS Block Island's aircraft in October. His submarine, U-109, limped home, battered. Bleriot never went back to sea. He told his fellow officers, "The Atlantic has become a slaughterhouse." By November, the Americans rolled out new tech that made things even worse for the U-boats. The MAD, magnetic anomaly detector, let aircraft spot subs hiding just under the surface. Sonobuoys dropped in patterns, tracked them for hours. The technology gap was turning into a chasm. Kapitan Lieutenant Ralph Heinrich Hauptmann had commanded U-405 through 7 war patrols. He'd kept his crew alive, using every trick, ducking into cloud cover, hiding in rain squalls, anything to shake the planes. But on Halloween 1943, U-405 was operating with wolfpack Siegfried when USS Card's hunter-killer group showed up. The destroyer USS Bogue picked up radar contact at 9 p.m., about 6,500 yards out. What happened next has become legend. U-405 tried to crash dive, but depth charges forced her back up. With the sub too damaged to dive again, Hauptmann decided to fight it out on the surface with the deck guns. In the chaos, pitch black, heavy seas, the two ships collided. Bogue's bow rode up on U-405's foredeck. For a few wild minutes, they were stuck together. Crews fired machine guns and pistols, even threw grenades at each other at point-blank range. American sailors hurled whatever they had, coffee mugs, shell casings, even a sheath knife, at the Germans. Finally, the ships broke apart. Lieutenant Commander Charles Hutchins, Bogue's captain, ordered everything they had to hit the sub. They fired over 4,000 rounds as U-405 tried to get away. The conning tower was shot to pieces, the deck gun destroyed, and the hull was leaking badly. Hauptmann told the men to abandon ship as U-405 sank stern first. Out of 49 men, only 8 survived the freezing water. Hauptmann wasn't one of them. Bogue herself was too damaged to save and was scuttled the next day. That fight proved it. No matter how skilled the U-boat commanders were, they couldn't beat the hunter-killer groups. Technology had changed the game, and it went way beyond radar or homing torpedoes. The balance of power in the Atlantic had shifted for good. Operations research teams cracked the code for finding submarines, mixing probability theory with sharp tactics. Acoustic analysts could pick out a single submarine just by listening to the unique hum of its propeller. Statisticians tracked U-boats, predicting where they'd pop up next by sifting through mountains of data. High-frequency direction finding, well, that was brutal. German sub-doctrine demanded regular radio reports to coordinate their wolfpacks. Each transmission only lasted a few seconds, but that was all. Allied stations needed to pin down their location within a couple meters. U-boat commanders were stuck. Stay quiet and lose touch with the rest of the pack, or send a message and give themselves away. The Germans trusted their Enigma encryption, convinced it was still airtight. They had no clue that after the British got their hands on code books from U-559 in October 1942, Bletchley Park broke the 4-rotor M4 cipher. Every order Admiral Dönitz sent to his submarines landed on Allied desks within hours. By December 1943, the tide had turned hard. Veteran U-boats that had dodged death since the war began started going down. U-172, led by Captain Lloyd Herman Hoffman, was one of them. She'd taken out 26 ships, over 150,000 tons of Allied shipping. Her crew had a reputation for skill and guts, always coming up with clever ways to pierce escort screens. But on December 13th, the USS Bogue's hunter-killer group caught her in the mid-Atlantic. A simple weather report gave her away, with direction-finding stations in Bermuda and the Azores, triangulating her position in no time. The first strike came from Lieutenant William Fowler's Avenger. He dropped a homing torpedo, but U-172's sonar operator picked it up and dodged it, barely. Evasion took a toll, draining the batteries fast. 2 hours later, 3 more aircraft joined in. For 14 hours, U-172 played a desperate cat-and-mouse game, surfacing just long enough for air, then crash diving when radar picked up more planes. By 8 a.m. on December 14th, the batteries and air were spent. Hoffman had no choice. He surfaced and stayed up, hoping to fight off the circling planes with anti-aircraft guns while his crew tried pointlessly to patch the damage. The fight on the surface dragged on for 43 minutes. Then 4 destroyer escorts, USS George E. Badger, USS Clemson, USS DuPont, and USS Osmond Ingram, closed in, blasting away with over 400 shells. 17 holes punched through U-172's hull before she finally went under. Only 13 out of 57 crew survived. The prisoners told a grim story. The ocean had become a death trap. We can't hide. We can't run. We can't fight. Every patrol feels like our last. By early 1944, the transformation was complete. The U-boat force that once nearly starved Britain was now being wiped out. January, 19 lost. February, 20 more. March, 23. The pace just kept picking up. Young, green commanders went out with barely any training. Take Oberleutnant Jose Wolfgang Hera on U-434. Just 23 years old, less than 6 months' experience. In March 1944, an Allied aircraft caught his boat on the surface. He ordered his crew to fight rather than dive. No one survived. The gap between American and German forces just grew wider. American pilots racked up hundreds of hours hunting submarines. Radar operators learned to spot the difference between a submarine and surface clutter, even at the far edge of their screens. Acoustic guys could identify a specific U-boat from the sound of its propeller, tracking it across thousands of miles. Meanwhile, German crews got younger and less skilled. The average U-boat commander was now just 26, down from 32. Seasoned petty officers, once the backbone of the subs, were getting rare. Boats sailed with crews who'd never seen combat, led by officers who'd barely finished rushed training courses. Admiral Donit's own son, Peter, was swept up in this. He served as a watch officer on U-954. On May 19, 1943, British escorts caught the sub on the surface and sank it with all hands. The admiral kept sending young men out, but the loss of his son drove home the real price of the U-boat campaign's collapse. By spring 1944, new American tech made U-boat operations almost suicidal. Centimetric radar on all hunter-killer planes wiped out any hope of hiding in the dark. Lee lights turned night into day, lighting up surfaced subs from miles away. Even the best German commanders couldn't escape detection anymore. On May 6, 1944, the USS Buckley got thrown into one of the strangest battles of World War II. Out in the dark waters, west of the Cape Verde Islands, Buckley found the German submarine U-66 on the surface. The U-boat's captain, Oberleutnant zur See Gerd Schauenburg, had survived 9 patrols and sunk 33 ships, but none of that mattered now. U-66's batteries were dead, so diving wasn't an option. Instead, the submarine tried to ram Buckley. At 15 knots, the two ships slammed together, hulls screeching in the night. Then things got even weirder. Crewmen on both sides fired pistols, rifles, anything they had, at close range. Some started hurling coffee mugs, empty shell casings, even grenades back and forth. Buckley's crew, led by Lieutenant Commander Brent Abel, answered with everything they had. 105 shells from their 3-inch guns, almost 3,000 rounds of 20 millimeters, and over 400 rounds of 40 millimeter to 16 minutes. U-66 was torn apart. The sub went down, taking half her crew with her. That hand-to-hand brawl was the last gasp of a time when submarines could fight on the surface like raiders. A month later, on June 4th, Captain Daniel, Gallery's hunter-killer group from USS Guadalcanal, pulled off something bigger. They captured U-505. The boarding team from USS Pillsbury jumped down the conning tower while the sub was still moving, seawater pouring in through damaged valves. They managed to stop the flooding and kept the sub afloat. The Americans grabbed code books, cipher machines, acoustic torpedoes, and technical manuals and intelligence jackpot. But honestly, the real prize was symbolic. U-boats weren't terrorizing the seas anymore. Now they were trophies, their crews prisoners. Then came June and the invasion of France. Hunter-killer groups swarmed into the Bay of Biscay, hunting U-boats that tried to attack Allied shipping. Those waters turned into a graveyard. 15 U-boats went down in the first week alone. Survivors talked about being swarmed by dozens of aircraft at once. No chance to run. One of the lucky few, Captain Lieutenant Herbert Werner, described it. We'd spot planes on radar, dive fast, and minutes later, hear sonar buoys splashing overhead. Then, the escorts would show up and hound us for days. If we surfaced, desperate for air, planes were already waiting. It was systematic extermination. By August, Admiral Dönitz ordered the evacuation of French U-boat bases as Allied armies closed in. Boats trying to reach Norway got hammered non-stop by hunter-killer groups lying in wait. Of 31 that tried, 11 never made it. The ones that did were beat up and their crews spent. The Germans had the Schnorchel now, a breathing tube that lets subs run their diesel engines underwater at periscope depth. But it was too little, too late. Schnorchel boats still showed up on radar and could only crawl along at 6 knots. It was a desperate move, not a comeback. By September, the Allies unleashed even better tech. The Mark 24 Fido torpedo got a range and sensitivity boost. New Hedgehog mortars could flood an area with contact-fused explosives. Radar could spot a periscope from 5 miles away. The gap was now huge, and everyone knew it. One night in October, Captain Lieutenant G.A., commanding U-110, watched 3 other subs in his wolfpack get wiped out. He wrote in his diary, "The enemy has weapons we can't answer. They strike without warning." Perfectly accurate. We're not fighting men anymore, but machines that never tire, never miss, never show mercy. By the end of 1944, the U-boat fleet was collapsing. November, 24 boats lost. December, 27 more gone. Germany couldn't build them fast enough. Training centers got bombed. Fuel ran low. The U-boat force was dying, and everyone saw it. Still, Dönitz kept sending young men to sea. Many barely out of school, rushed through training, commanding their first and last patrols at the same time. The Atlantic wasn't a battlefield anymore. It was an execution ground. Take U-396, for example. Herr Captain Oberleutnant zur See Ernst Günther Unterhorst and his crew, average age just 20, set out from Norway in November 1944. USS Corps' hunter-killer group found them within 3 days. The chase lasted 18 hours. When U-396 finally surfaced, batteries dead and air gone, aircraft were waiting. They blew her out of the water. No one survived. The winter of 1944-45 saw the arrival of the snorkel-equipped Type 21 submarines. On paper, these boats looked like game changers. They could cruise underwater at 16 knots and had cutting-edge sensors. But in reality, only 2 ever made it into action before the war ended. By then, the hunter-killer groups had already beaten Germany's technological leap just by outnumbering and relentlessly hunting down U-boats. The numbers say it all. Back in 1942, U-boats sank 160 Allied ships, a staggering 6.2 million tons. Fast forward to 1944, and that number drops to 132 ships, less than 800,000 tons. That's a 90% collapse in effectiveness. Meanwhile, American shipyards were cranking out Liberty ships at an insane pace, over 140 a month, almost 3 every 2 days, each loaded with 10,000 tons of cargo. Germany just couldn't keep up. By March 1945, the U-boat fleet was basically a ghost force. Out of the 463 boats supposedly available, fewer than 60 could actually go to sea. Most sat idle in port, out of fuel, missing torpedoes or short on trained crews, and the few that did head out, almost none made it back. The hunter-killer groups had turned sub-hunting into a science, after 2 years of non-stop action. The final blow landed in April 1945. U-546 managed to torpedo the USS Frederick C. Davis, part of the USS Bogue screen. The destroyer escort went down, but the price was steep. Within hours, the escorts tracked down and destroyed U-546. It was the last U-boat the Bogue's group would kill, their 13th. Admiral Donitz's last entry on submarine operations was bitter. The enemy's superiority at sea, especially in science and technology, has ripped from our hands the most effective weapon we had. The submarine war is lost. It had all changed in less than 2 years. In March 1943, U-boats nearly cut the Atlantic lifeline, sinking ships faster than the Allies could build them. By March 1945, the U-boat force was basically finished, trapped in ports or hunted down at sea. The hunter-killer groups pulled this off by mastering technology, intelligence, and sheer industrial muscle. Sub-hunting stopped being a game of guesswork and luck. It became methodical, research, practice, and relentless improvement. Every part of anti-submarine warfare got sharper, smarter, and deadlier. The USS Bogue ended the war as the top hunter-killer group, with 13 U-boats sunk. USS Card had 11, USS Core got 6. These little escort carriers and their teams did what the big fleet units never imagined possible. But their real legacy wasn't just how many subs they killed, it was how they fought. They proved that the future belonged to those who could blend intelligence, tech, and industry into a single, relentless war machine. Individual daring still mattered, but it couldn't beat a system stacked against you. The old days of lone wolf submarine aces outwitting the odds were gone for good. The shock for German U-boat crews ran deep. They'd started the war as the feared grey wolves, ready to strangle Britain's supply lines. They ended it as hunted animals trapped between a hostile ocean and a homeland, slipping out of reach. Corvette. Captain Peter Creamer, one of the few surviving aces, later wrote, "We had no answer to the hunter-killer groups. They had every advantage. Radar we couldn't see, weapons we couldn't dodge, intelligence that tracked our every move, and, worst of all, they seemed to be everywhere at once. We went from hunters to hunted almost overnight. The human cost was staggering. Out of 40,000 German submariners, 30,000 never came home, a 75% casualty rate. Of 1,162 commissioned U-boats, 784 were lost. By the end of the war, more than half of all boats on their first patrol were sunk. Entire graduating classes from U-boat school disappeared within months. American losses, minimal. The hunter-killer groups lost just one escort carrier in the Atlantic, USS Block Island, in May 1944, and fewer than 10 destroyer escorts for the whole campaign. The kill ratio, which once favored the U-boats 10-1, flipped. Now it favored the Americans 20-1. The tactics invented by the hunter-killer groups reshaped naval warfare for decades, blending air and surface ships, letting intelligence drive the hunt, and using hard data to refine every move. These all became standard practice. The Cold War's anti-submarine game leaned heavily on what was learned in the Atlantic. But honestly, the biggest impact was in people's minds. The U-boat force had once stood for German naval power and cutting-edge tech. When American hunter-killer groups took them down, it sent a clear signal. Wars from now on would hinge on who could outproduce and out-innovate the other side. The days of lone heroes making the difference were over. Now it was all about systems and scale. By May 1945, Germany surrendered, and the last U-boats got Donitz's final order: surface, hoist black flags, head for Allied ports. Out of 49 boats that obeyed, a bunch were led by officers not even 25 years old, some with crews of teenagers who'd never fired a shot. In anger, they gave up to hunter-killer groups who'd been getting ready to wipe them out with the same cold precision that defined the whole campaign. The last U-boat patrol didn't even make it to surrender. On May 7th, 1945, British escort sank U-301. Her commander, Oberleutnant zur See Helmut Emmerich, was only 24. He and his 36 men were the last casualties of a force that, not long before, had looked like it might change the course of the war. After the war, analysts marveled at just how efficient the hunter-killer operations had become. They'd fine-tuned search patterns with probability theory, figured out how to hit their targets while barely wasting ammo, and used intercepted messages to predict exactly what the U-boats would do next. Every part of the system got sharpened through hard analysis and real-world trial and error. For German U-boat captains, the real gut punch wasn't just losing their edge, it was how fast it all collapsed. In March 1943, their wolfpacks were tearing up Allied convoys, almost cutting off the Atlantic lifeline. But by November, the hunters had become the hunted. Bases were under watch, comms were cracked, every move was anticipated and blocked. No single piece of tech flipped the script. It was the way all the advantages clicked together: radar that spotted subs day or night, aircraft that could fly for hours over the open ocean, weapons that could track down subs no matter how hard they tried to hide, intelligence that let the Allies act before the Germans even made a move, factories that churned out replacements faster than Germany could sink them. The hunter-killer groups wrote the rulebook for modern naval war, where victory didn't come from guts or individual skill, but from owning every piece of the puzzle. They turned the Atlantic from a giant hiding place into a battlefield where nothing stayed secret for long. Every message got intercepted, every slip-up could mean death. Donitz ended up spending a decade in Spandau prison thinking about how his creation was smashed. In his memoirs, he admitted it. "I thought courage and determination could beat material disadvantage." The American hunter-killer groups proved that technology and industry decide modern wars. We didn't lose to better sailors, but to better systems. That's the legacy those hunter-killer groups left behind. They showed that future naval wars would be won not just with ships, but by tying together air, sea, intelligence, and science. The nuclear subs of the Cold War, with their advanced sensors and weapons, grew directly from the lessons of those Atlantic campaigns. Now, in the cold dark of the Atlantic, more than 500 German subs lie rusting on the seafloor, each one a marker of how brutally effective those American hunter-killer teams were. They turned sub-hunting from a desperate defense into a relentless, systematic offense. The young men who took command of those doomed boats signed up thinking they'd be part of an elite force that might decide the war. What they found instead was an enemy who didn't just fight better. They changed the very nature of fighting, swapping out the art of battle for the science of destruction. That shock ran through the U-boat force and has echoed through naval history ever since. At the start of 1943, the German U-boats owned the Atlantic. Their wolfpacks tore through convoys with almost no resistance. But by the end, they were fugitives, bases bombed, supply lines cut, experienced crews gone, and the rest trapped in port or running for their lives. That collapse wasn't just a historical footnote. It marked the moment when technology, intelligence, and industrial might took over, forever changing how wars would be fought at sea. Back in 1943, the American hunter-killer groups stunned German U-boat captains, not because they were braver or better sailors, but because they brought overwhelming technology and industrial muscle to the fight. Suddenly, the ocean wasn't a hiding place anymore. It turned into a deadly arena where precision mattered more than raw courage. And the numbers didn't lie. These groups, working with their allies, took out 784 German U-boats. They killed 30,000 German submariners and lost fewer than 5,000 of their own. In less than 2 years, they turned the U-boat threat from almost winning to total collapse. This was more than just a military win. It was proof that warfare itself had changed. The days of the lone submarine captain sneaking around and relying on wits were over. From now on, victory belonged to combined fleets packed with advanced sensors, smart weapons, and real-time intelligence, all working together. The hunter-killer groups didn't just win the fight for the Atlantic, they flipped the script on naval war itself. The hunters became the hunted, and the transformation was total.